dangerous country in a dangerous part of the world. We continue to go after high-value targets inside of Yemen, and we will continue to maintain the pressure that's required to keep the American people safe.
I do think we need some special operations in these countries on the ground, more than just advisors. And I think we need to protect our allies. That's Israel, that's Jordan, that's Saudi Arabia, and be more pronounced about it.
Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein and President Obama in India talking about the counterterrorism effort, specifically the effort in Yemen that the president said is still going on as the administration tries to forecast and project fighting terror around the world. Let's bring in our panel. Syndicated columnist George Will, Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles, thoughts?
Well, the president's equanimity on this is rather interesting, where he tells us all the things he's doing when you look around. I mean, this is a man who promised and whose mission is to end the wars, and he seems to believe that they were ending or are ending, and yet when you look at what's happened, you've got Al-Qaeda revived with a vengeance. We saw what happened in Paris. We've got ISIS having doubled the territory it controls since Obama declared war on it. And with Iran, which is sort of the third jihadist leader in the world, extending its influence in Iraq and its hegemony in Syria, in Lebanon, and now in Yemen. That's a pretty sorry performance, and the president seems rather unimpressed by what's happening on his watch.
Mara, there's interesting back and forth as the Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, went to a number of Sunday shows, including Fox News Sunday this weekend. Juxtapose what he said this weekend about the war on terror and what the president said in the State of the Union just last year.
We are, however, at war against Al-Qaeda. Its manifestations in Yemen, its manifestations in South Asia, its manifestations in East Africa, North Africa, and we're at war, bound to ultimately destroy, first defeat, then destroy ISIL in Iraq and Syria.
So even as we actively and aggressively pursue terrorist networks through more targeted efforts and by building the capacity of our foreign partners, America must move off a permanent war footing.
Not to mention this year's State of the Union, Mara, where the president did not mention those words, Al-Qaeda.
Dennis McDonough just listed an awful lot of wars, or a lot of places where we are at war. I think that the president's message is, let's talk about domestic affairs. We've ended the wars, we're off a permanent war footing, but the fact is that we're still on a war footing, and he is sending more troops little by little into a lot of these countries. He's raised the number of troops in Iraq, and I think he's going to have to continue elsewhere, because the strategy of training these the armed forces of these so-called friendly governments just hasn't worked yet for us. So I think it's a real problem, and we're right in the middle of a whole bunch of sectarian wars, Shiite and Sunni conflicts, plus you've got Al-Qaeda and you've got ISIS, and we don't really have a good strategy. Now, on the other hand, you've got, you don't have Republicans jumping up and down and saying, commit more troops. There are a few voices, Dianne Feinstein, John McCain.
John McCain, yeah, sure. George, your thoughts?
Well, we've heard two very interesting words used so far in the clips you've just shown. One is manifestation. We're fighting Al-Qaeda's manifestations here, there, and everywhere. And I gather that doesn't mean we're just fighting Al-Qaeda, but something that can be ascribed to it as an extension or an emulation of it. It's hard to say, but it really does mean that this is metastasizing rather rapidly. Second, Dianne Feinstein said we should be more pronounced, which is a delicate way of saying more forceful and more, as she clearly indicated, more involved on the ground. George Orwell said the quickest way to end a war is to lose it. I would add the quickest way to lose a war is to say you can win it from the air. I was interested that Ben Rhodes was shown earlier in our program tonight saying that, well, we're quite active with drones and other air power. The problem is at the same time we're supposedly talking with the Iraqis and others about how to retake Mosul. Well, Mosul will be retaken and wars are won by men on the ground holding rifles.
You listen to Dianne Feinstein, who obviously now is the vice chair of the Senate Intel Committee, and the people who are on those top post intelligence committees, most all of them say there needs to be more done as they look at the intelligence picture around the world. Charles, in that same sense, the administration is negotiating, it seems, with countries about these al-Qaeda operatives that we have in custody. You had the Taliban 5 from Gitmo, and now a story about this guy Al-Mari, who was released from prison early and now is in Qatar. Thoughts about that and how it's playing around the world?
Look, in principle, I'm not against prisoner swaps. Ronald Reagan released the 5 hardened Soviet spies in return for Natan Sharansky, who wasn't even a spy, he was a political prisoner and completely innocent. But you do it in wartime. The problem I have is that Al-Mari, the guy who supposedly was involved in this alleged swap, was going to be released within about a year anyway. He got a 15-year sentence. And it shows what the problem is when you try terrorists in a civilian court. People say, oh, it's a great success. Look at all the ones who were convicted. Yes, but unless you give them life imprisonment, they're going to get out. And then they'll be completely unshackled, and then they can return and kill Americans and continue the jihad. That's why you want to detain them. In the Second World War, we had hundreds of thousands of Japanese and German prisoners of war in the U.S. None had a lawyer, none had a trial, and everyone had to wait until the end of the war. That's the logic of having a Guantanamo. What I worry about is not a prisoner swap. It's the unilateral release of prisoners in the middle of what is obviously a raging war against us.
Mara, one last thing. What about this, are we ever